All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everybody had a chance to grab some food. Fingers crossed. I feel like our technology situation, we might have sorted it for session 2 here. So really excited to go to our, I'm just gonna section. Really excited to transition to session 2, and thanks to our next speaker for being a good sport, for being willing to go just a little bit later. I'd like to introduce our next introducer, who's a wonderful fellow of the Good Engineering Center, a colleague from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy across the road, Professor Karina Runkovich.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce you, Kat. She's a wonderful student. She came to me a couple of years ago to help co-advise her project with Dr. Rosa, and together with seeing her project evolve. And I'm always so surprised and pleasantly surprised at what she's able to do. She also took a course with me in fisheries management at the Coast Guard Academy. And as you probably know, it's a very different environment, but she fit in really well with the students. She worked with the group projects. She actually received an award for the best presentation of her catch of the day. So it's been such a pleasure to work with Kat. So let's welcome her to our team.
Hi, my name is Katarina Mann. I'm an environmental studies major and sociology minor, and I'm presenting on the role of perception in the conservation of horseshoe crabs on the Long Island Sound. And before I get the presentation started, just to get an idea of the population in the room, I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes. I'm going to ask a few questions, and if you raise your hand, keep it up until I tell you to put it down. All right, everybody close your eyes. All right, raise your hand if you've ever seen a horseshoe crab in person. Raise your hand if you are a fan of shorebirds. Raise your hand if you've ever had a vaccine. All right, keep your hand up, open your eyes, look around the room. Looks like everybody in this room has interacted with horseshoe crabs in one way or another. Just keep that in mind. All right, horseshoe crabs are often referred to as the living fossil, since they've been around for about 400 million years and have remained relatively unchanged. They also play an important role in marine ecosystems. Their eggs provide sustenance for migratory shorebirds, such as the red knot, during their seasonal migration. And horseshoe crabs also provide a habitat for amphibiont species, which are small organisms like snails or anemones that live on the surface of other marine organisms, kind of go through life with the horseshoe crab. And horseshoe crabs are also known for their blue blood, which is copper-based. Their blood contains a clotting agent called limulus adipocyte lysate, which is essentially clotting agent that forms around a pathogen or a toxin in horseshoe crab's blood, so it doesn't actually harm the horseshoe crab. And eventually, along the way, humans discovered this, and horseshoe crabs are now taken in temporarily, bled, and every injectable drug or vaccine certified by the FDA is certified using LAL, or Limulus adipocyte lysate. So according to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, the New York region, seen on the map to your right, has been in a poor state as compared to the Northeast, which has remained in a neutral state, and the southern regions, which has remained in the good state since 2019. Threats to horseshoe crabs can include both environmental and economic causes. Although the horseshoe crabs are re-released after they're taken in to be bled, the death rate from this process ranges from about 4% to 30%, and this doesn't necessarily include behavior changes after re-release or death further after they're released back in the ocean. Horseshoe crabs are also caught to use as bait in eel and whelk fisheries and have previously been overfished. Although in 2023, the state of Connecticut did pass a pan harvesting ban on horseshoe crabs, although the state of New York does not currently hold this policy. Habitat loss due to the hardening of shorelines, other coastal development, and sea level rise have also reduced the range of sandy beach available for the horseshoe crab to lay their eggs. And all of this left me questioning why the New York region specifically is having trouble preserving their population of horseshoe crabs. So this past summer, I was able to work as an aquarium intern at Maritime Gloucester in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is a small maritime history museum and aquarium. Most of what I worked on was keeping the tanks clean and the animals fed, but I also had the chance to lead educational programs for students of all ages, ranging from preschool to high school, kind of going through the importance of the aquarium animals with them. However, my favorite part of the job was my conversations with the public, specifically around horseshoe crabs. I liked speaking with Gloucester locals, where horseshoe crabs do appear on the beaches, and many of them had different opinions. Some noticed that there was a change in the population. They were either older and would come in and say, I used to see hundreds of them, and now I'm lucky to see maybe one or two. Some of them were afraid of them, thinking that their tails, which kind of looks like a stingray tail, were dangerous, which isn't true. And some of them thought they just looked scary and stated that they would feel uncomfortable seeing this on the beach. And all of these opinions led me to the development of my senior integrated project. So I was mainly interested in two questions: what factors might influence awareness of horseshoe crabs and their conservation, and does public perception of horseshoe crabs affect their conservation efforts? So I decided to develop a survey that would be sent out to the general public along the Long Island Sound. This questionnaire was composed of 23 questions separated into demographics, awareness of perception, ecological and economic importance, population and conservation and regulation. And I then had to receive approval from the Connecticut College's Institutional Review Board, in which I filled out a detailed application, including a consent and debriefing form, to ensure participants were all well informed both before and after their participation. So the survey was created and distributed to the online platform Qualtrics. The survey was then sent to various contacts from Mystic Aquarium, Project Lemulus at Sacred Heart University, the Southern New England chapter of the American Fisheries Society, Save the Sound, and the Goodwin Center, who were all kind enough to distribute the survey to their contacts. I then analyzed the survey data using descriptive statistics in the form of pie charts to visualize the results, a t-test, which compares the means between two groups, see if there's a significant difference, was performed to compare the knowledge of horseshoe crabs from those further inland to those who are living directly on the coast. And chi-squared tests, which tested there's an association between two variables, was used to investigate the relationship between knowledge and perception and concern for horseshoe crabs. So I received exactly 30 respondents. A majority of them were female. We had a pretty even distribution of education levels. We had some college completed, those who hold undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees. However, we didn't have any respondents with the highest level of education being high school. In terms of age, a large proportion of our respondents were college aged, 18 to 24, with other large proportions of 65 and older and 45 to 54. And one interesting example of the descriptive stats I found was the difference between the awareness of horseshoe crab conservation efforts in inland towns versus those in coastal towns. So about 90% of the coastal respondents reported that they were aware of horseshoe crab conservation, while about 50% of inland respondents reported that they were aware of these conservation efforts. And on the inferential statistics side, I found that the difference between knowledge levels in inland versus coastal areas was insignificant, as well as the relationship between knowledge and perception of horseshoe crabs. However, I did find that the relationship between horseshoe crab perception and the concern for the population of horseshoe crabs was statistically significant, meaning that there was a found association between both concern and perception. So one of the main things I learned is how much public perception can shape conservation efforts. It's not necessarily about having the right data or information, but also about how people feel and what they believe. If a species is seen as more important or interesting, people may be more likely to support it. I also noticed that awareness and concern are not equally distributed. People living along the coast tend to be more aware, likely because they are seeing these efforts in animals in their daily lives. So geography, access, and experience all play a role in how people engage with environmental issues. And moving forward, I think there are a few key directions this kind of research could go. First, I think I would benefit from a larger scale survey that captures a wider range of educational backgrounds and communities. My results may have been a bit biased since I was contacting environmental groups, so these people likely had also interacted with environmental groups. This would help paint a more complete picture about how widespread or limited awareness is. And one of the more immediate solutions could be increasing signage in public spaces that explains the importance of these creatures that are so vital to their community. And finally, I feel as though education is key. Perhaps programs that establish a personal connection could increase the number of people who become more passionate about protecting these ancient organisms. And finally, I'd like to thank my two advisors, Professor Karina Mrakovich and Professor Maria Rosa, everybody in the GNCE team, specifically Jen Lamb, Kelly Wagner, and Professor Derek Turner, all the survey distributors, as mentioned before, and finally my friends and family who supported me throughout this process. Thank you.
So to introduce our next speaker, we have Professor Marian Borelli from the Government Department.
It's my pleasure to introduce Roma Glennis to you, and I'm going to tell you 3 things about her that you'll be able to discern but indirectly from her presentation. First, she's a very talented field hockey player, and anybody can play a game where nobody understands the rules, has to really have their act together. Secondly, she's a government minor. We met last fall in a course on presidential rhetoric. I think that says it all. And third, her major is environmental studies. She's been engaged in the process of public education, mobilization, and communication through internships and in the classroom. I feel very fortunate to have worked with her, and I think you're lucky to be listening to her tonight. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Roma Glennis. I'm a senior of the Goodwin Muring Center. I'm an environmental studies major and government minor, and today I will be presenting my SIP titled Going Back to the Source, Manufacturing, PFAS, and Legislative Responses in New England. Before I jump in, I would love to ask for some audience participation. Please raise your hand if you use non-stick pots and pans when cooking. Please raise your hand if you wear a raincoat when it rains outside. And please raise your hand if you use floss, or ever use floss. Great. I see that the majority of you have raised your hands. Unfortunately, all of these everyday products contain PFAS chemicals. 99% of the population has a detectable amount of one or more types of PFAS in their blood. Many people are exposed to PFAS on a daily basis and don't know about it. PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They are a group of artificial chemicals that are utilized in the production of a handful of industry and consumer products. Common items containing PFAS include non-stick cookware, water-resistant electronics, food containers, firefighter foam and PPE, dental floss, menstrual products, waterproof cosmetics, and artificial turf, like the newly installed one on our campus. PFAS have a strong carbon-fluorine bond, which allows them to resist degradation and makes it difficult for them to break down. This gives them their water-resistant property that allows for products to last longer. PFAS exposure can be harmful to human health, and based on the level of exposure, can lead to increased cholesterol, liver damage, reduced immune response to vaccines, kidney and testicular cancer. Marine organisms can also ingest PFAS from chemical runoff, which can bioaccumulate in their organ systems and tissues, leading to impaired reproduction, hindered development, and disrupted immune function. The questions that guided my research paper include: how progressive is New England with regards to the implementation of PFAS regulations regulating manufacturing? And which state has implemented the most stringent PFAS manufacturing legislation in the region? I chose to hone in on New England specifically as I was born and raised in Massachusetts, and the region is also recognized as a national leader in PFAS regulation alongside California. My research focuses solely on the manufacturing of PFAS-containing products. The majority of U.S. Legislation regarding PFAS is more so on drinking water standards, but manufacturing specifically does stop PFAS in stores, unlike drinking water standards. My preliminary research method was consulting media sources, both international news organizations like the New York Times, as well as state and regional newspapers via the Access World News database. I found that PFAS gained media attention around 2019, with coverage increasing every year since. This indicates that PFAS has been a salient issue for about 5 years and is a relatively new area of study. This information was useful in learning the time frame for PFAS legislation. I also used participant observation, drawing on notes from a PFAS briefing event that I attended last summer at the Massachusetts State House while interning for Seaside Sustainability. At the event, I learned about House Bill 4486, which proposed banning PFAS in consumer products in the Commonwealth. One of the most notable advocacy groups present was a Massachusetts firefighter union, which I will talk more about later. My primary research method was legislative research. I analyzed the language of PFAS bills from each of the 6 New England state legislatures, focusing on only those targeting manufacturers specifically. I used state legislative websites as well as referenced an environmental advocacy group, Safer States, who published a bill tracker. Firefighters are especially vulnerable to health impacts like cancer from frequent exposure to PFAS-containing firefighter foam and gear. At the Massachusetts State House briefing, members of the Professional Firefighters Association of Massachusetts were present at the event, including their president, McKinnon, who spoke emotionally about losing colleagues to occupational cancer, and they urged representatives to pass the bill, which would help protect firefighters moving forward. Although House Bill 4486 did not pass, 2 months later, Governor Healy signed Senate Bill 2902 into law, which directly bans PFAS and firefighter foam and gear. I'm highlighting firefighters specifically because banning PFAS and firefighter foam and gear is the only consistent PFAS policy regarding manufacturing across New England. While this bill does help reduce occupational cancer risk, the public remains exposed as most states have yet to ban PFAS in everyday consumer products. Here's a map of New England that ranks the states by number and comprehensiveness of PFAS manufacturing policies. As you can see, the darkest shade of blue represents Maine, which has implemented the most amount and most extensive policies addressing PFAS from multiple sources. The lightest shade of blue represents New Hampshire, which has the least amount and least comprehensive measures. New England states are taking varied approaches to addressing PFAS manufacturers, which has been largely shaped by their distinct economic and political priorities, particularly their unique manufacturing histories, which and whether those sectors remain active today. In addition to this map, I have ranked the 6 states into 3 different stages of action: initiating, introducing, and enacting PFAS legislation. New England, Connecticut, and Vermont are all in the early stages of initiating PFAS legislation, ranking lowest in the region for scope and quantity of their manufacturing policies. All 3 states have only passed 2 legislative PFAS bills regulating manufacturing. New Hampshire is a historically significant textile producing state. Early PFAS detection in the water supply was linked to toxic textile treatments. Textiles are treated for water and stain resistance, which requires the application of PFAS chemicals, which are subsequently released into waterways. Connecticut has a very prominent shipbuilding history. Boat construction is very common, as well as the use of paints and protective coatings, which also releases PFAS into waterways. And lastly, Vermont has been heavily reliant on the granite mining industry since the Industrial Revolution. While granite has bolstered the state's economy, the mining process creates hazardous conditions for both workers and the environment. The risk of fires breaking out in mines are really high, and as a result, firefighter foam and gear is stored on site to suppress fires once they arise, which introduces PFAS. PFAS can also be introduced at these locations from the application of other industrial chemicals being utilized. Next, Massachusetts and Rhode Island have passed PFAS legislation regulating manufacturing and have additional bills under consideration for 2025, showing continued legislative action on PFAS. Both states have rich textile histories. The textile manufacturing process is highly water intensive, and high levels of PFAS are often applied to products, which are often discharged into nearby waterways without proper treatment. Massachusetts has passed one bill banning PFAS in firefighter foam and PPE, and is currently reviewing 6 bills aimed to ban PFAS across various consumer products. Rhode Island, on the other hand, has passed 2 bills banning PFAS in manufacturing and is currently considering one bill this legislative session. Maine leads New England in PFAS regulation, having passed 7 bills, more than any other state in the region. Maine is known for its historic paper production, particularly the renowned Rumford Mill. The paper production process heavily relies on PFAS, resulting in Maine facing significant environmental contamination from untreated wastewater. Since 2019, Maine has consistently enacted policies regulating sources of PFAS, including food packaging, consumer products, firefighter foam, and PPE, as well as pesticides. While no bills are specifically targeting manufacturing are under consideration for 2025, the state continues to take a very comprehensive approach to targeting PFAS. Overall, I learned from this research that all New England states have different manufacturing histories and statuses, which have played a key role in shaping their legislative responses to PFAS. It is clear that within the region, Maine has taken on a leadership role in enacting PFAS regulation, regulating manufacturing. Other U.S. states should follow New England's role and adopt similar strict PFAS regulations and learn from the policy language that was utilized. Ongoing scientific research, educational initiatives, and community engagement are essential to generating legislative action. In future policy making, New England must prioritize PFAS manufacturing legislation over drinking water standards to more effectively regulate PFAS at its source. I would like to thank everybody, particularly Professor Borelli, Professor Turner, Professor Flagg, Jen, Kelly, and Claire Laughlin for all their help during this process. And you can scan the QR code if you'd like to read my full essay.
Owen, thank you. I'll do that for a second. So the pleasure falls to me to actually introduce our next speaker. I'm not Noah Vernig's SIP advisor, though when I talked to Noah about his project, I kind of wish I was. He's worked with Professor Sophia Gudin in anthropology, and they have shared interests and sense of place and similar topics. But I just, Noah's project really speaks to me. I love the musical traditions that he's thinking about, and I've enjoyed all of my conversations with him about the history of coal mining. I just got to share one more thing. It was a total joy. I got to watch the live stream of his senior recital last night on guitar. He is a fantastic musician, and playing old time music, Golden Park Crossing the Rhine, stuff like that was awesome. So huge pleasure. And as you enjoy Noah sharing his work, keep in mind he really is participating as a musician in the musical traditions that he's going to be talking about. So Noah, come on down.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noah Vernick. I'm an environmental studies major. Today I'm going to be talking about coal mining in Appalachia. So, it's probably the wrong slide, actually. It should be a video here. It wasn't just, oh, there we go. All right, cool. So, I don't have any fun audience interaction here. Nobody can do anything, but I do have a song, so that's pretty exciting. So, my project is all about how music intersects with the environment. So I figured I'd start with a song. This is by John Prine called Paradise. It's about strip mining. Let's see if we can actually get it to play. Well, maybe not. So I'll just read this. The coal company came with the world's largest shovel, and they tortured the timber and stripped all the land. Well, they dug for their coal till the land was forsaken, and they wrote it all down as the Parkinson Man. Sounds a lot better than he does it, but yeah, I want you guys to think about this quote as I go through this presentation. So my research question here is, how can Appalachian music be used to tell and preserve the history and culture of the region? So a little bit about myself. I started playing guitar a little bit before my freshman year of college, and really involved in the music scene at Connecticut College. Since then, I've been involved with the music department, involved with Mall Rock. I've really found a love for bluegrass and country music. So that led me to the next step of really thinking about Appalachian music as a force in the environmental movement. I was thinking about how Appalachian music addresses the region relating to poverty, relating to the environment, relating to coal mining. Finally, I took this course called Religion and Climate Change, which introduced me to the topic of mountaintop removal mining, which is kind of the main focus of my internship and much of this project. It really just blew my mind that there's a process still happening. Next, I want to introduce mountaintop removal mining. So this is a form of coal mining where mountains are blown up to expose the coal seam below. It's extremely harmful to the environment. It's destroyed over 500 mountains. There's a process known as valley fills, in which debris from the mining process is pushed into the valleys below, namely stream beds, which destroyed over 700 miles of Appalachian streams. And that's a figure from the EPA in 1997. So since then, it's been a lot more destroyed. So over the summer, this past summer, I interned at Coal River Mountain Watch. It's a nonprofit organization aimed at ending mountaintop mining in West Virginia. It's located in Neoma, West Virginia, which is this small town. It's not even on the map. Of course, this town here is white still, and just in the middle of coal country, in the middle of nowhere, really. And I got to spend the summer there. I spent about 2 months there. So I was working there as a GIS intern, helping them map mountaintop removal sites. Their main goal is to end mountaintop removal mining. They've been involved in many regional projects around there, helping bolster the community, stopping environmental degradation, supporting locals in projects such as access to clean water. And they currently continue the fight for the preservation of the mountains in the area. This, of course, is extremely pressing now with the current administration. This is another video here. Let's get it to play. Well, let's start here by talking about my SFD. So this is taking the form of a website. I really wanted to make something interactive where you could hear the music that I'm talking about and have access to the information below it. So this video would kind of run through, it's a screen recording of the website, run through the first page of the website and the home page, I guess, in the first page. Basically, the format of it is having a historical event. This first one starts with the origin of coal mining in the U.S., then having a song related to it, with a quote from that song really related to the topic, and then a video with the song playing. And then after that song would be some information following it, giving further historical context to that event. So the next couple of slides are basically explaining that process, explaining the key points from that website. So the first being the historical background of coal mining in Appalachia. So I went through the process this past semester of going through the history of coal mining in Appalachia, and I chose some key events from that. A lot of these events are stuff like labor uprisings, coal mining disasters, and forget that. Important legislation, for example, some black lung legislation that was passed in the 1970s, early 2000s. This legislation passed along with battlefields, trying to limit battlefields, stuff like that. And I think this is really important in understanding the current relationship of coal mining in Appalachia and the current poverty of that region. Looking at the history really explains why this region is impoverished, and also explains why there's such a complex relationship with coal mining. That's such a prominent part of the culture, even though it does really have a lot of harm to it related to disasters and the environment. So next is music. So I really wanted to make music the main part of this project, as I felt that as an outsider from Massachusetts, actually, that I felt having Appalachian voices telling the story was very important. So through this project, I chose specific songs that relate to all these historical events that I've chosen, and these songs basically explain the historical event. I wanted the songs to really tell the story here, and although I wrote additional details down about this each event, I really wanted to make it so you could solely listen to the song and really have a good understanding of historical context related to that event. And I chose a wide range of Appalachian songs, some really historical ones from 100 years ago, and current day songs, which really just, again, demonstrates the kind of linear trend of all of this, with coal mining still being very prevalent in the current day, as well as this musical tradition being very prevalent in the current day. And finally, that brings me to present day, where this project connects back to mountaintop nickel mining in my summer internship. So mountaintop nickel mining not only threatens the environment, but really threatens the culture of Appalachia. Down here is a picture of a family graveyard on top of this mountain that's been thoroughly mined. So family graveyards, they're really a big tradition in Appalachia, and that's kind of one of the many examples of this kind of culture and way of life that's being threatened. And I just wanted to throw that out as an example, as one of the really main theme of many of these traditional bluegrass songs, family graveyards, like my parents being buried on a mountain, stuff like that. And that was really the inspiration for this project. Is when I first heard one of those songs, I was kind of thinking back to an image like this and wondering how is this sort of kind of modern process of mountaintop nickel mining reflected with these traditional songs. And Appalachian music really serves as an essential way of preserving this culture. Appalachia has such a rich musical tradition, and I think music is something that really like a wide range of people can appreciate. Me being someone from Massachusetts, and being kind of introduced to this whole world, this whole topic through music is kind of really impactful to myself. I hope through this website, I hope I can really get a lot of interaction with it and kind of have this impactful experience be brought to others. And then finally with this project, the last little bit was the future. As I mentioned, the current administration, coal is being really pushed as a new, well not new, I guess, an old source of energy. And unfortunately, that's going to have a huge impact on the region, affecting the mountains and the people, and everything related to them, from the homes they live in, the environment around them, and the water that they access. So it's not looking like a bright future, but I think it's a very important aspect of this project. So that's kind of how that website will wrap up. I want to thank the Community Center, Jen Kelly, Professor Turner, and my SFP advisor, Professor Lee. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Apologies for not having an audience. This is way, hopefully we can at some point share the link to your website because it's really cool with combining both the curated historians and music. Okay, so I also get to introduce our next speaker. This is kind of a wonderful case of almost like an accidental connection. I feel so fortunate, kind of lucky. We have another faculty colleague, Professor Neely, who might have been the logical SIP advisor for Rebecca. But Professor Neely's on sabbatical this semester, so we get to work together. And it's been like fantastic, just absolutely wonderful. We've had wonderful discussions of a couple of examples of environmental literature, and it's been a real treat for me to actually read and discuss with Rebecca some of her own creative fiction, which is really terrific. So, Rebecca, to you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and my name is Rebecca. I'm an English major and a botany and math minor, and I'll be presenting my project from Treated Book, the dissemination of environmental literature. So this semester, I've been doing an independent study with Derek, where I've been creating a collection of short stories about the relationship between people and nature. As you can see, I've entitled it Trees and Organs. It's essentially an amalgamation of everything I've learned at Con packaged into a few fictional narratives. So first, what is environmental literature? Environmental literature is a broad term for a very diverse range of writing which engages with environmental issues or conceptions. This can be in the form of essays and peer-reviewed articles, but also fiction, poetry, and other forms of creative writing. Environmental literature is important since it plays a role in helping people recognize their place in and influence on nature. It raises awareness of ecological concerns and triggers a sense of responsibility towards the environment. It is an extremely effective way to communicate issues to people in a manner that is both persuasive and inspiring. So during the summer, I did an internship at Yale University Press. I worked in the acquisitions department, which essentially deals with publishing from the ground up. And so my responsibilities dealt with books at different stages of their development. This internship helped me decide the format of my SIP. When creating my project, a lot of thought went into how it might be received and interpreted. And while working at Yale, I realized that the editors were prone to publishing books by people who were already acclaimed in their fields. Much of the decisions were based on how well they would represent the press. That's not to say that the books they publish are superficial, but it does mean that it's difficult for new scholars to make themselves known and get their ideas publicized. Because of this, I decided to create a collection of fiction, focusing more on adapting people's perception of environmental issues using emotion over logic. Since from a publisher's perspective, it's more profitable to publish nonfiction with someone who has an ample background in the field over someone who has yet to complete her degree. So there are a lot of factors that inspired my writing and kind of shaped my narratives, the narratives of my stories. The books up here are a few that I read before this semester, so before actually beginning my SIP. Each book is incredibly gripping with the way it engages the reader using beautiful commentary on nature and illuminating the connection between humans and the environment. Much of my motivation for pursuing this type of project stemmed from these sources. Perhaps my favorite part of my independent study was meeting weekly with Derek to discuss these two books. We read them together, and it was so much fun because we essentially held a mini book club every week. Unlike the books I mentioned previously, these two I really did a deep dive into. I wanted to note the writing techniques they used, what emotions they pandered to, how engaging the language was, essentially every part of the book that made it appealing to readers. I also looked at the overall message they put across and whether it was one that I thought enforced a good relationship with nature or not. So the book How I Became a Tree is a memoir where the author Sumana Roy explores her journey towards living like a tree. The book is fascinating for multiple reasons, but ultimately I found it to be a detrimental addition to the genre. Her approach was very anthropocentric, really only focusing on what she could get from trees, and had a very naive perspective on the relationship between humanity and nature. It felt to me to be another example of a human-centric agenda, essentially another way for humans to monopolize and consume concepts or traditions that aren't meant for us. Her lack of botanical knowledge was also very prevalent, since instead of recognizing or acknowledging the distinct divide between humans and the environment, she would apply human analogies or logic to nature. On the other hand, the book The Word for Women is Wilderness is a fictional coming-of-age story following a teenage girl as she backpacks from England to Alaska. And I think it's an excellent example. The protagonist was dynamic and intelligent, constantly referencing real philosophers and events, and made readers look at how environmental factors affect various groups differently. The protagonist has many flaws, and her actions often contradict her words, but what was really incredible are the changes that she goes through. There are a lot of things that she says that I disagree with. I don't have enough time to get into all of it. But her ability to learn and grow shed light on the mistakes she made during the journey and help the reader to also reflect on themselves. So my SIP consists of an introduction and 4 stories I have written. I wrote many of these stories while taking Professor Graham's short story writing class, which was incredibly helpful in generating ideas and learning how to write an engaging and meaningful story. We read the book Writing Fiction by Jane Burroway, which has really helped bolster my story writing skills. So the first story I wrote was The First Dawn, which is a creation story revolving around the sacrifice of a tree to create the earth and the child it left behind to nurture the planet. I wanted to begin my collection by placing the reader in a different reality. Probably one of the most familiar creation stories is Adam and Eve. It is largely a tale in which humanity is divorced from the world God has created. There's a subtle subconscious division between humans and nature in the story that has persisted for centuries. Instead, I was inspired by Robin Wall Kimmerer's retelling of the Haudenosaunee creation myth of Sky Woman from her book Braiding Sweetgrass. The story is about a woman who falls from the sky and how, with the help of the animals around her, she was able to create Earth. It encourages the idea of reciprocity and gratitude, and shows how the world is built on a profound connection between humans and nature. I wanted my story to promote a similar understanding so that when the rest of the stories were read, there was a distinct divide between them. My next story is Skadsroa and Her Garden, which is a story about a woman and her relationship with her garden. It incorporates Swedish folklore to explore themes of womanhood and environmental aesthetics. It was inspired by the book Why Women Grow by Alice Vincent. Why Women Grow is a memoir where the author interviews women living all across England about their relationship with their garden. It really resonated with me because of the way each woman was able to express herself so distinctly through her garden. By gardening, each woman was also able to learn things about themselves, and in some cases become accepting of their flaws and insecurities. I was also inspired by Jane Austen, who in Pride and Prejudice uses her characters to represent different environmental aesthetics, namely neoclassical and picturesque. In my story, the protagonist Sylvia is originally very rigid, very neoclassical, and how she gardens reflects this as she focuses more on the production and material success of her plants. However, as she becomes more comfortable with herself and breaks away from the roles expected of her, she allows her garden to flourish naturally, focusing less on how much she can gain from it, and instead finding solace in the natural growth and decay. Plum Blossom Spring follows a 3-year-old girl named Ping as she discovers the world. The perception of this piece kind of shapes the story because it offers readers a chance to view things that are commonplace with wonder and innocence. The story gets its name from the utopian society Peach Blossom Spring, conceptualized by Tao Yuan Ming in 421. He wrote this during a time of political instability and national disunity, so I kind of used that as a backdrop for the environment Ping grows up in. In the story, her family immigrated to America from China and brings with them a plum blossom tree. However, the tree is cut down when the neighbor's child eats one of the sour fruits. Though Though an edible fruit usually isn't consumed raw, and so the child cries at the bitter taste, and his parents inevitably end up getting the tree cut down. The tree being felled kind of symbolizes the beginning of Pinkin's maturation as she realizes her place in the world. Finally, Knock on Wood describes the life of a young woman who has lost her father and is all she finds in the wooden objects she interacts with. It explores themes of death in both a human and a plant context, looking at where we place value and how it affects our relationship with that thing. For example, in the story, there's a wooden coffee table that her father is fond of since it's a keepsake from his mother. The protagonist, however, does not share this affection, but instead gets jealous of the attention her father affords it. Obviously, when we think about it, it's just a wooden table. There really is nothing special about it. However, it becomes valuable depending on how we choose to interact with it. When I was initially conceptualizing my project, I had envisioned it as a manuscript ready to be picked up by an editor, but I kind of ended up wanting something more substantial, so I decided it would be cool to publish it myself. I haven't done it yet, but I plan to bookbind it myself. In addition to it being something I've always wanted to do, I felt it was important for me to be actively engaged in every part of the collection's creation. When I hold this book, I want to be able to understand everything that has gone into making it. I think when we read books, a lot of us forget that it was sourced from trade. And by bookbinding, I wanted to personally feel that sacrifice and remember it every time I look at or hold the book. To finish my presentation, I wanted to read an excerpt from my introduction. So here goes. The stories we read stick with us. They live and grow inside us, seated in the pit of our stomachs, and growing out of us like a forest of flowers, trees, and moss. We all have a garden within us. We must remember to water it. So I want to say thank you to my academic advisors, Professor Oxby, Professor Owen, and Professor O'Keefe, my SIP advisor, Professor Turner, everyone at the Good Engineering Center, so Professor Newick, Professor Flag, Jen, and Kelly, Professor Brennan for helping me revise some of my stories, and Natalie and Eva from the University Press. Thank you.
Okay, and to introduce our next speaker, I'd like to invite Professor Doug Thompson down. Doug, wonderful supporter, students, and former director of the Unity Center.
Well, I had a really wonderful time this semester working with Sadie. We initially connected actually around the subject of water. She was working with me partly on her Good Engineering Center proposal and also took the hydrology course with me. It has evolved in a really interesting way. I originally thought this was going to be more of a traditional kind of literature study of water issues and policies and so forth. It's turned into just an incredibly beautiful project. We had really great conversations. I just really enjoyed talking with her every week about how to move forward with this, and I think you're going to really appreciate the beauty she brings to this. There are a number of different brochures on the edge there that are part of her product, so if you want to take a look at those, I'm sure she would appreciate you taking a look.
Hi everyone, my name is Sadie, and I'm going to be talking about communicating watershed conservation in politically conservative areas of the American West. So my animating question is, how can conservation organizations and environmentalists nationwide better communicate watershed conservation methods to populations who are currently politically opposed to the issue? In Connecticut, this might seem a little bit disconnected, but I do have a really deep connection with this problem. I was born in Park City, Utah. I grew up in the mountains, grew up fishing, and hiking, and I did rodeo. This is me with my horse Vegas when I was little. So I kind of have a background in the kind of ranching sector of that, but I also have a deep love for the outdoors. And I think spending time in the outdoors, especially out west, you see the impacts of climate change and other environmental issues firsthand. I remember I first got into this issue when I went down Beaver Cabin in southern Utah. And one of the streams that I've been growing up fishing, it's I think where I caught one of my first fish on a fly rod, was completely dried up. And I just didn't know why this happened or what would happen to the fish, you know, who rely on that stream. So that kind of sent me down this path. And I don't know how much you guys know, but the water usage in the American West is pretty unsustainable. It goes all the way back to 1922 when the Colorado River Compact was first passed. It pretty much divided all the sections of the Colorado River and to all the different states. That includes Arizona, Nevada, California, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming, both with the upper basin and lower basin. And this was a extremely unsustainable law that was passed mostly because the years that they took the information from, it was an extremely wet year, so they pretty much promised people water that was not even available. And when you look at it today, with climate change exacerbating already few water resources out west, there's water being promised that is just not there. And with different seniority with ranchers and stuff and their water rights, certain people are just not getting the water that they need. And then also there's generally for grazing, and this for cow ranching, and this is countrywide. A lot of people use rotational grazing, which pretty much means that you divide your pastures into around 2 parts instead of multiple parts, and your cows will sit there and graze pretty much all year long, only getting rotated once a year. And that just means the cattle are sitting there and overgrazing the grass, and there's a lot of soil compaction and a lot of, especially if a stream is running through, there's a lot of sediment going into the rivers, and a lot of like native grasses and native species are driven out of the area just because it's inhospitable at that point. So my project is focusing on AMP grazing, and that's adaptive multi-paddock grazing. It pretty much mimics what the bison did when they were, much more abundant in America's history. It utilizes small, non-permanent paddocks like you see in this photo, kind of the more green one. You separate your whole property using non-permanent fencing that you can take out and put back down in 5 minutes or less. And it pretty much makes sure that the cows are on the area for less time. So there's more rest time for the different areas in your paddocks. And this would be an amazing substitute for rotational grazing, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. So my project for my SIP is to create a graphic novel. I don't know if you guys, I kind of spread them out all on that side, so if you want to start passing them down. I was going to print more copies, but I ran out of printing funds, so I don't have any more. But if you really want one, especially in a larger format, just come talk to me afterwards. I would be happy to print them for you. And I think using graphic novel is a really important way to convey information. I don't know about you guys, but I was not a very good student in high school, and I had a really hard time learning certain things, especially history or more quantitative stuff. And so I learned most of my stuff through graphic novels. I read the No Fear Shakespeare graphic novels and everything. So I think it's a really kind of surprising and unassuming way to convey information. And it's telling it in a story, which I think is really important because people are much more likely to listen when it's kind of exciting and there's a plot and all that stuff. So that's kind of why I wanted to go through that. And pretty much my intention with the graphic novel were to explain the benefits of AMP grazing and kind of delve into the conflicts between those researching AMP grazing, which often happen a lot kind of in more urban and kind of educationally privileged areas, And those who are actually implementing this change, which are the ranchers themselves, and often like rural America where there aren't very many schools, not a lot of higher education. And it's meant to be more of a call in versus a call out. I think when you call in people and say like, hey, this is what's going on, like you should maybe think about changing this instead of just being like, hey, you're doing it wrong, and you know, this whole way that you're doing it should not even be happening, is not great. So a lot of what went into this graphic novel is character design. I don't know how much you guys think about this, but whenever I watch a movie or anything, I'm like really interested in how the character design, you know, how they decide what the characters look like and their backstories and everything. So one of my characters is Margaret. She is kind of this girl who goes in and is trying to convince these ranchers to do ant grazing. And I kind of wanted her to embody this like stereotypical aspect of a liberal environmentalist. And when I was making her, I realized she like kind of looks like me. So that was always funny. But and it kind of just, by putting her in this more Western rural area, it shows this kind of like otherness and kind of how out of touch she is, both with her dress to her language to her worldviews. And she just has this kind of level of educational privilege that she didn't expect to be a problem going into the story. So my other characters are the Springs. They're the first people she meets that she tries to convince. They are much a rural, conservative, multi-generational ranchers. This is Val on the screen. He's actually based off of a guy that I know very well named Val. He is, you know, your old-fashioned gunslinger, like kind of not politically correct man. But I still love him. He's really a character. And I also wanted to delve into kind of this like rural hospitality that you see a lot of times out west and in the South, where even if they don't like you, they'll still be really kind to you and entertain what you have to say a lot of times. And just people who are very steadfast in their lifestyles. They're very stubborn. They've been doing this for generations, and they're not looking to change how they're doing stuff. But the other characters that I made were Hank and Morgan. They are kind of similar to the Springs, except they have less privileged water positions. A lot of how much water you have out west is based on like whether your water rights laws were grandfathered in, so the people who got them first, especially the Colorado River Compact, have the access to the most water, and BLM and stuff don't really regulate how much water they take, especially if a stream goes through a land. You can't really regulate how much your cows drink. So a lot of times people further down on the stream don't have access to as much water or need to be more frugal with it or change some of their methods. So they were more open to creative solutions. And Hank's wife, Morgan, I wanted to add in is I made her Native American, and I just want to do this as an homage to Native peoples who have been really amazing stewards to our lands and often are the ones who are proposing these solutions. And they have ties both with kind of the cowboy, areas and environmentalists. So they are a really awesome bridge in this kind of world. Along with my graphic novel, I'm also creating a brochure, not quite done yet, so I'm using the illustration I did in my novel. But I think brochures are really interesting because you have to physically go up and give it to the person, and that requires you to have a personal connection with whoever you're trying to convince. It's not like you're just giving them a big talk or leading them to a website. You need to go door to door and have these hard conversations with people. And it also allows, the ranchers an ability to share these with their friends. They're able to be passed out. So, and I've included a lot of more rancher targeted arguments and resources, because I think what we prioritize as environmentalists is not completely the same as what they prioritize, and that's fine, but we just need to change the language that we use. And so this is all to kind of show the benefits of ant grazing. Ant grazing for ranchers is really useful because it creates healthier, more abundant grasses. When you're giving pastures more rest times, you're creating healthier, more abundant grasses and more native grasses. And that means ranchers are less reliant on antibiotics, which means their cows are healthier and you have better quality meat, which is an awesome economic gain Plus, it's great for the cows, it's more humane, and it actually has very low startup cost. It doesn't take that much more money, and so you're not losing, I think, you're not losing a lot of money. Being sustainable is very helpful when you make being sustainable as easy as not being sustainable. So this is one of the big pushes for amp grazing. And then just environmentally, with longer pasture rest times, there's less nutrient leaching from the soil, there's less erosion, and there's less eutrophication for waterways, which goes into my original interest which it makes it safer for the fish to live in on the streams and everything. And there's better water infiltration and soil aeration as well, just because there isn't as much soil compaction. So more native grass species are able to come up, which then brings in other native species like quail, who don't hurt the cows and they're really good for the environment. So it's all around a really good thing to have healthier grass. And there's a reduction in methane emissions because you aren't as reliant on feed sources like alfalfa or grain to substitute what your cows are not getting from these unhealthy fields. And this is really important because this novel kind of talks about these benefits and talks about how to communicate these in a way that actually gets people to change. I think what I've learned most from this project is that no one party is at fault. I think it's hard to change your ways when you've been doing it your whole life and you haven't known any different. And if someone comes in and tells you that what you're doing is terrible and you shouldn't do it, and they've never even been on a ranch or worked it, that's kind of more of their fault in terms of communication. But the environmental solutions are there and they're correct. They just need to be communicated differently. And I think we all just need to acknowledge that both groups really care about their environment. It's not like they care less about their environment. This is their home. This is their legacy. They rely off of this for their, all of their finances, for their livelihoods, for their kids and everything. So it's not a who cares about the environment less. It's about how we can change rhetoric so that they can understand that if they change to amp grazing, that it's not going to hurt their livelihood. It's just adding to it in the future. So I would just like to thank a lot of different people in this room. Professor Thompson probably knew this. He's like really good at like discussing plot and stuff, which I was surprised about, so that was really fun. Professor Flagg, Professor Catherine Dew in the art department, she helped me with the first half of this in the first semester. Jen Kelly, Derek, sorry your name is on there. Saber Canyons, that's who I interned with, and then just my parents for showing me, the natural world I love so much. Thanks.
Well, thanks to everybody for spending the whole evening with us. It's really great. I'm really glad to introduce our last introducer, Professor Rosa from the biology department.
We made it. That's for last. No, they're really amazing. I was just talking with Derek that this is one of my favorite parts, just seeing everything that the students do. When we talk about service as faculty, like how we spend our time outside of teaching, and we get to pick and literally working with students and seeing how awesome they are. It fills my cup. So I am so happy to introduce Sophie. It's my pleasure to introduce her today. So Sophie first joined my lab as a wee sophomore. She has done a ton of research, has served as a research assistant for multiple grants. So what she's presenting here is just a fraction of what she has done. I like to joke that Sophie was part of a group that kept the lab going during that one crazy spring semester. She has also worked as a peer tutor and a TA for several classes, so the biology department has been so lucky to have her. Super proud of what she has accomplished so far, and I look forward to seeing what the future has in store. Now, this is the third iteration of her project, which really highlights her adaptability and resiliency. So with that, Sophie.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophie. I'm a biology major with an ecology concentration, and my SIP this spring has been about assessing the use of drone imagery for seagrass health evaluation and restoration. So you're probably wondering, why seagrass? Seagrass is definitely an underappreciated habitat and doesn't have the same PR that coral reefs and dolphins and turtles and whales do, but I promise by the end of this presentation, you all will be seagrass fanatics as well. First off, seagrass sequesters carbon up to 40 times more efficiently than terrestrial forests, constituting up to 18% of the ocean's total carbon sequestration, despite only covering 0.1% of the ocean's surface. Second, seagrass acts as a nursery habitat for many juvenile species of fish and invertebrates. Many commercial fisheries depend on the health of seagrass meadows, as various commercial species like grouper, snapper, flounder, and bass use the meadows for habitat and production. Larger marine mammals, like dolphins and manatees, also rely on seagrasses for food, as they eat the organisms that inhabit the meadows. Seagrass also protects the coastline from erosion, as they trap sediment and attenuate wave energy. And they also play a role in the biogeochemical cycling of nutrients as well, providing many nutrients for the organisms that inhabit the meadows and for other parts of the ocean. I first became exposed to seagrass communities when I was abroad last spring in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and I completed a directed research project on the relationship between loosened clay abundance and seagrass erosion edges. If you know me, you know I could talk for hours about this project, but in summary, we took sediment core samples at certain distances away from where seagrass was vegetated and unvegetated, and saw if there was a difference in clay abundance. And I loved every single aspect of this project, from diving in just 3 feet of water to spending 8 hours straight in the lab sorting through mud. And it got me interested in seagrass ecosystems and wanting to learn more about them. So, like Professor Rosa mentioned, throughout the semester my project has taken on very many forms and I have done a lot of pivoting. My initial research question was going to be about how effective current eelgrass restoration initiatives are in the Long Island Sound by using drone images of pre-restoration and post-restoration. But it turns out I wasn't able to get the post-restoration images until next year, which wouldn't really be that helpful. My next question was going to be about assessing eelgrass coverage throughout the Long Island Sound using LiDAR data, which is just radar data using a light sensor for 3D mapping, and seeing how it changed from decade to decade. But I also didn't have access to this data as well, and I have to shift my project again. My internship this past summer was with the University of Florida, using drone imagery and ArcGIS to map boat propeller scars on seagrass meadows, and I'm very thankful that they allowed me to use this data for this project. So for my SIP, I'm using Florida's Gulf Coast as a case study for using drone imagery to assess seagrass health and restoration. So here's a map of the sites that were part of the study, and for each site there were multiple 80-hectare plots that were downloaded into ArcGIS, along with a template for all the scars that we had to classify, which I'll talk about in a minute. I personally have mapped 15 of these tiles, which will be the basis for my case study. For my project, I was looking at boat propeller scarring on seagrass meadows, which happens because boats move too fast through the meadows or go too shallow, since seagrasses are shallow water plants. The propellers cut through the grass and or the roots and rhizomes, and depending how deep the propeller goes, cause a scar, which appears as a linear feature. So here's all the scar types. There's another slide too, but a light scar is classified as a light linear feature on a dark background, so that would be seagrass. A dark scar is a dark linear feature on a dark background. A soft bottom scar is a dark linear feature on a light background, so sediment. And a hard bottom scar is a light linear feature on an orange or brown background, so things like limestone. And a lighter scar is one that cuts deeper than a dark scar, exposing more sediment and ripping up more of the roots and rhizomes. And there was definitely a steep learning curve in determining which scars were present and if they actually were scars, or if they were just ripples in the water, floating pieces of algae, natural lines in the sediment, or my brain was just playing tricks on me from staring at a computer screen for too long. The substrate colors were also difficult to determine, as there wasn't just one light colored substrate and one dark colored substrate, but a bunch of different shades. And trying to figure out what scar was present was quite challenging at times and definitely took a lot of second guessing. So I wanted to show you some examples of the most scarred tiles that I traced. Thankfully, out of the 15 tiles that I traced, only 3 of them have really heavy scarring, which is a plus, definitely. But here's what it looks like pre-tracing, and here's what it looks like post-tracing. So there's all 4 scar types are present on this image. I wish I had a laser pointer or something. But the green lines are dark scars, the blue lines are soft bottom scars, the white lines are light scars, and the orange lines, there's a couple up there, are hard bottom scars. And this is just a really zoomed in part of the tile, just a fraction of it, and unfortunately the rest of the 80 hectare tile looks pretty scarred, if not more scarred in this image. So here's another example. You can already kind of see the scarring there. But then here's what it looks like post-tracing. So you can see again the light scars in white and the hard bottom in orange. And thankfully this was only a small section that was pretty scarred. The rest of the tile was minimally scarred. And then lastly, here's what it looks like pre-tracing and post-tracing. So you can see a lot of light scarring in the white, some dark scarring in the green, and some hard bottom in the orange. And again, with the first image, this tile, this is only a fraction of it, but the rest of the tile looks pretty much like this as well, with a lot of scarring. So what did I find? In areas of more scarring, there was evidence of increased patchiness, which can lead to habitat fragmentation, which is where seagrass meadows divide into smaller, less dense areas, and there are areas of unvegetated sediment, where boat propellers have ripped up the seagrass roots and shoots, or above and below ground biomass. These unvegetated areas then lead to increased competition for nutrients and space with algae. So the point of this project was to get a sense of how anthropogenic changes, such as boating, can cause harm to seagrass meadows, which can eventually hinder their ability to recover and respond to disturbance. Density is a really large factor in terms of seagrass restoration, and as higher density is linked to more effective restoration. And I wanted to see how anthropogenic activities were affecting seagrass density. So in the Gulf Coast, I found evidence of habitat fragmentation and competition, which can severely impact the ability of seagrasses in this area to recover from other disturbances, such as disease, eutrophication, and coastal development, which could both directly and indirectly cause habitat loss. In addition to a decrease in density, habitat fragmentation can also hinder the ability of seagrasses to trap sediments, decreasing food and nutrient availability for seagrasses and for other species that inhabit the meadows. Algal competition, especially in areas of high nutrient availability, can also lead to both decreased biodiversity, as many organisms utilize seagrasses for habitat, food, and protection, and increased algal blooms, which can cause hypoxic areas or areas of little to no oxygen. So through this analysis, I found that drone imagery can be a really effective tool for restoration, as the imagery can provide a better view into the areas of concern and more accurately measure density. Restoration is such a difficult and time-consuming process because there are so many different factors influencing these initiatives. However, being able to understand how certain activities are impacting the density of seagrasses can be really useful for site selection for restoration sites. Restoration of seagrasses relies heavily on things like density, temperature, light availability, and amount of disturbance. And drone imagery can be really important for picking the spots that have the highest chance for success. Specifically for the Long Island Sound, Zostera marina or eelgrass populations have been declining since the 1930s due to eelgrass wasting disease. And anthropogenic activities are worsening the effects of this disease, meaning that eelgrass populations are definitely struggling. There are current restoration initiatives happening, and I've been really lucky to be a part of some of them through Professor Rose's lab and through Save the Sound. But because of the low density of eelgrass in this region, restoration is definitely slow moving. So on the left, this is us putting in the reef balls for the Living Shoreline project. And then the 2 right images are, we glued some eelgrass seeds to clams to see if they could transplant better that way. And then this is my friend Kate. She unfortunately doesn't take any pictures of me, so she's measuring the eelgrass. Had a study we did at UConn Avery Point, seeing how eelgrass grew glued to clams versus not glued to clams. Drone imagery
imagery can also be really helpful in other restoration projects surrounding seagrass meadows and other coastal habitats like coral reefs and mangroves. With drones, you can visualize how human activities are impacting marine mammal feeding, such as dugongs, which are the Pacific cousin to manatees. By looking at their feeding trails and how they change based on distance from boat ramps, protected versus non-protected areas, and highly developed coastal areas, and learn how to better conserve and protect these species as well. Overall, I found that site selection of seagrass meadows is extremely important in determining the outcome for restoration initiatives, and by using drone imagery to assess anthropogenic impact and density of seagrass, it can lead to more effective restoration efforts and healthier seagrass meadows. So I would first like to thank Professor Rosa for being both my SIP and major advisor and guiding me through this project, which would definitely be nowhere without her amazing support. I'd also like to thank everyone in the Goodman Viewing Center, Derek, Professor Flagg, Jen, and Kelly, and also my supervisors at the University of Florida, Savannah and Mark, for letting me use their data. I'd also like to thank the NOAA Restore Science Program for funding the SCARS map research, and lastly, all the staff and students at the School for Field Studies and the Turks and Caicos for inspiring this project, specifically my Correlation Core group, Shades, Kira, Violet, Rory, and Natalie, and also my family for watching. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie. I want to apologize again for the tech problems. It kind of ate into our time for discussion, but I think, well, can we maybe recognize all the seniors again with one more round of applause? And oh yeah, and I think we'd like to take a picture of the seniors up in front. In just a minute. So, and I also want to invite everybody